I'm James Popham. I'm standing on top of the expressway in Kitchener, and these people are all speeding. Let's talk about that. Alright everyone, during the break there I jumped to the Waterloo campus of Wilfrid Laurier University. And I'm going to take a little cruise around our community. Hopefully during that time we can talk a little bit about rules and how they influence us. So here we go. Now one of the first things that you might be wondering is, why am I taking us on this driving tour? For many of us, driving is a pretty normal, everyday thing. And I suspect that many of you are familiar with driving in Waterloo. Am I doing this because I want to tell you that the drivers in Waterloo are terrible? Not really. As I'm driving, I want to point out some of the different rules and regulations that we experience. So here, as I make my way along Bricker, I'm passing a row of parked cars. Parked on the side of the road. They're within these little L brackets that indicate it's a safe place for them to park. Normally, you're not allowed to park on the road, but there's an indicator there that it's okay. Now, as I head up Albert, I'm driving in a shared road, which very quickly here becomes one with a bike lane. And again, this is a really important identification of the different rules that we address. There's not much that's really going to stop me from driving into that bike lane, other than some bollards and some planters. But theoretically, I could take my car there, especially if I was maybe in a raised truck. Now I'm turning right onto University. Now here's an interesting thing that I'm doing, something that you're not allowed to do in many countries, and that's turning right on a red light. I'm waiting for the traffic to clear, and now that it is, away I go. And as I'm driving along University Avenue here, you'll notice that, again, there are a number of different indicators about how we should be behaving and what we should be doing while we're driving along the road. There are traffic lights overhead, so I'm just coming up to the Hazel Street traffic lights. These allow entry into the Laurier campus, but they also allow pedestrians to cross the road. There are a number of vehicles in front of me, and each of them are acting in accordance to the rules. So for example, there was just a red light, and everybody stopped. The light's gone green, and now I'm driving. And so when we look around, when we drive around, we see there's an entire language that dictates the rules of the road. Now some of these rules are more explicit than others. So for example, as I go through yet another traffic light here, I know that when it's a green light, it's okay for me to drive through it, but when it's a red light, I need to stop. There's nothing physically stopping me from going through a red light, nothing more than some paint on the road. But as has been habituated in me over the past 20 odd years of driving, red lights mean stop. Similarly, as I look around, there's a number of different lines on the road. So to the left of me, as I progress down King Street here, is a solid yellow line. And again, if you have any familiarity with driving, you know that that yellow line means do not cross. It's there for a very good reason. It tells me that if I cross over this line, I run the risk of running into an oncoming vehicle. But it's not physically stopping me from doing that. There are other signs here that are more suggestions than they are rules or laws. But the point that I want to make is that as we go through our daily lives, not just as road traffic, but in many of the different things that we do, we are surrounded by rules and regulation. Some of these rules are law. As I mentioned, going through a red light is a violation of the Ontario Highway Traffic Act. Some of the rules are indicators or suggestions. So even though there's a solid yellow line on the road as I'm driving through, it doesn't mean that I cannot cross it. In fact, under the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, there are no prohibitions to crossing over into the oncoming vehicles or oncoming traffic lanes, regardless of what's painted on the ground. And so, as we operate our vehicles and as we walk down the sidewalks or go through school or go through many of these other different systems that we generally interact with, we encounter a number of different rules, obligations, and expectations. So the big question becomes, well, which of these are hard and fast? Which of these are rules that we must obey? And perhaps if we take this even a little bit further, the question is, are there any rules that we need to obey? And while that seems to make sense in certain cases, for example, here in Waterloo, just in the last few years, we've had an LRT, so an on-the-road train installed. And we certainly don't want to run into the train by disobeying the rules that tell us when we should or should not cross the tracks. There are other rules that are a little bit less distinct. One of the big ones, as I mentioned when we started this video, is traffic speed. Every road in Ontario has a posted speed limit, and in cases where there isn't a posted speed limit, a default speed limit. You'll see these as you enter into towns and cities where they set out what the rules of the road are. Generally, on a small suburban street, it's somewhere between 40 and 50 kilometers an hour. A larger road might be 60 kilometers an hour, and regional roads might be as much as 80 kilometers an hour. But most people drive at the pace that they feel most comfortable going. And oftentimes that pace is actually much faster than the speed that is posted. And this begets a big question, and one that we're often challenged with in the study of criminology. And that is, does breaking a law make a person a criminal? Now, on your first consideration, it might be very simple. It might seem simple to say, yes, everybody who violates the law is by nature a criminal. Criminals are individuals who break the codified rules and regulations that are intended to shape our society. And so, by violating those rules and regulations, they are by nature a criminal. But when we think about this from a more holistic lens, we take away that pragmatic assumption that the law is absolute, we see that it becomes much more difficult to identify a single person as a criminal. Put yourself in the situation of driving. Have you ever driven past the speed limit? Have you ever parked in a no parking zone? Have you ever violated the countless other regulations that exist that define the way people ought to behave in our society? And perhaps you haven't driven and you're saying, well, that doesn't apply to me. Well, there's a number of other rules and regulations that we are all expected to understand and know. Yet most people haven't memorized the Criminal Code of Canada. So this semester, as we explore what criminology is, I think it's really important that we start with a discussion about what crime is. And as we go through this semester, I want to challenge you to think about crime. And I want you to think about it in the most critical of senses. That is, just because something has been codified, does that make it a crime? And vice versa. What about the things that haven't been codified? Does that make them legal and just and normal to do just because they haven't been codified? We'll explore this more, but this brings an end to our tour. I think that's a good place to stop. So, I'm looking forward to talking to you more about crime this semester. Until then, thank you.